It's me, Fee, or the White Zulu, and welcome to another chapter from my autobiography, the second one, the sequel to White Zulu, and it's called Zulu Mists, and this is chapter 16, Calendar, Tragedy. Time went pleasantly by, and after a long, dark winter, spent sometimes driving Alistair and Ethel around and having the opportunity to explore the Trossachs. Now, just quickly, you can Google it, the Trossachs. They're a group of little lakes near Calendar, and they are absolutely exquisitely beautiful and pristine. Explore the Trossachs and other surroundings with her, as she had been born and brought up there. At other times, I bundled Alistair up with a woolly jacket, bobble hat, and fleece mittens, put him in his pushchair, and we walked up to the farm to have afternoon tea with Morag and her brood. Alistair's first birthday came and went. And actually so did mine, which turned it into 1973. And I held a little party for him, my first ever, and his. And then I noticed daffodils starting to flower everywhere, beyond the farm, on the way to Kilmahog, was a country house with enormous grounds, and the owners and then their predecessors had planted the entire estate to daffodils of every description. Again, it was within walking distance, and Ethel and I took Alistair along to wander around a massive sea, yellow sea of the flowers. Max, Fred's younger brother, had his 21st birthday, a house party at Glen Cruton. Fred had received an engraved invitation, but I didn't. Thinking it was an oversight, Fred rang his parents, only to be told, "Sorry, darling, there simply isn't enough room for anyone else but you." He was furious. He knew full well how many rooms there were, including the nursery, which would take an endless overspill of guests. "If you can't go, then I'm not going either." This is ridiculous. They're trying to make a point that you are not welcome in the family. This made me sad, as they were close brothers and sisters. And his sisters were going to be there as well. "You go on up there and enjoy myself. I doubt I'd have that much fun anyway. And otherwise, you'll never get to see your sisters again if things are going to continue this way." But Fred was adamant. He felt it was a betrayal to his wife to leave her behind. "I simply won't enjoy it if you're not there, babe. I don't know any of Max's friends, as he's so much younger than I am, and my sister's friends terrify me." So the party came and went without us. Another summer came the same routine. We still had a little bit of pleasant respite during the winter, when Bar and Bob had taken off for warmer climes and gone to spend 2 months in Florida, leaving us in peace. But now they were back for the Scottish summer, They were also back to haunt us every weekend. I could see Fred gradually withdraw again, like he had when he first arrived at Glen Cruton, and I worried for him. Secretly, I wondered if the best plan of action wouldn't be to return to South Africa and resume our lives there. But tempting as the thought was, I knew it was totally impractical because inevitably Fred would have to pick up the reins at Glen Cruton, and until he did, there would be no peace from his mother. Alistair was an adorable baby and bloomed into a sunny-natured toddler who laughed and smiled and played happily, whatever the circumstances. Again, we took him up to Glen Cruton to enjoy a little paddle in the wee loch and for ourselves to go mackerel fishing again. But these interludes were all too infrequent, and we seemed to spend a lot of the weekends on the narrow road to Oban, which was now jammed with caravans, all moving at snail's pace. Normally it takes 2 hours to get there. Sometimes our 2-hour journey back home took twice as long, and then it was time for Fred to get up and go to work on the site in Stirling, while I spent a long, lonely morning tackling the housework and laundry while Alistair slept. Early one morning in August, Fred lay in bed looking very pale and said, "Babe, I simply can't get up. There's something wrong with me, and I can't seem to be able to get out of bed." I rang his work and told them he wasn't coming in, and then rang our nice, friendly GP, asking him to call in and see Fred. He did a thorough examination and asked a lot of questions, and then sat on the end of the bed and said, "I can't find anything physically wrong with him. Sorry, wrong with you. But you seem to be under an enormous amount of stress. Going to refer you to a psychiatrist in Edinburgh and see what is going on." 2 days later, I drove Fred over to Edinburgh. He was still in the same listless condition, not sleeping, no appetite, which is most unlike him. We were shown into a big office in one of the big buildings, huge buildings right in the middle of town, which looked onto the hill where the castle stands, the famous Edinburgh Castle. There, seated in a leather chair behind the huge desk, was a man in his mid-60s who seemed pleasant enough. He didn't examine Fred as the GP had done and asked a lot of questions again, covering more or less the same ground as the GP had. "I suspect you have been undergoing a lot of stress, and I'm going to prescribe you some antidepressants, something to help you sleep, and an antipsychotic drug, which should all help. I want you to go home, take these, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. He dished up a cocktail of red capsules, white tablets, and 2 other types of drug. I can't remember the colours. It seemed rather a lot, and I was concerned. But since he was a psychiatrist, a very young wife and mother, I knew I felt he knew what he was doing. I drove Fred home feeling most uneasy. He'd been almost silent throughout the journey, in and during the conversation, apart from answering the questions asked by the specialist, and even then, very briefly. And now he was silent again. This was not like my Fred. Once we went home and collected Alistair from Ethel, who was babysitting him. I gave Fred the dose prescribed, and he went off to bed to lie down. I let him sleep, only waking him to give him some soup before letting him drift back again. The following day, I counted out and gave him more of the medication, and he fell into deep sleep again. This pattern continued for a couple of days, and I rang the psychiatrist to ask if this was normal. How long would Fred sleep, and when would I see some sort of improvement in him? "Oh, this may take some weeks," was the reply. "Just let him be. He'll relax and be back to normal in no time." I tried to coax Fred out of bed and drive him out to the Trossachs to give Alistair a little paddle, as he was almost walking by now. I succeeded only once, but felt so sorry for Fred, as he could scarcely keep his eyes open as we lay on the rug in the warm sun, and I watched our baby splashing happily in the shallows. On the 16th of August, before the 2 weeks was up, and I was due to go back to to take Fred back to the psychiatrist. It was a sunny morning, and I'd managed to get Fred up and dressed, and he was wandering around the house, but in a complete daze. I put my pinny on and began to plate up some cold ham and salad, while Alistair sat in his high chair, gnawing on a raw carrot and watching me. The house was quiet, but in the not-so-far distance, I heard police sirens. At first, I gave it no thought and went to look for Fred to tell him his lunch was ready. There was no sign of him. He wasn't in the house, nor was he in the garden, or even in the outside stables. I looked everywhere, and still the sirens continued to wail. Something made me snatch up the phone and ask Ethel to come over to be with Alistair, and I began to run down the main road, a narrow but busy road which took all the traffic from Stirling through Callander and upwards into the Highlands. I ran towards the noise of the sirens and then saw a police car parked across the road. A young policeman saw me running and walked briskly up to intercept me before I got to the scene. I'm not sure what he said, but he put me in the front seat of the police car, reversed, and drove me back to where Morag was waiting for me at the farm. As we got into the police car, I did a strange thing. I put my pinny over my head and began keening and wailing exactly as a Zulu woman would. I was unaware of doing it at the time, but clearly remembered it quite instinctively. There was a terrible hush in Morag's front room, where I was sitting. She and her husband sat with me, but didn't utter a word. Finally, the young policeman, accompanied by another one, came in together, both with their hats and caps under their arms. I knew none of them needed to say anything at all. But the colleague said, "Are you Mrs. Mackay-James?" I nodded. "It is with regret that I have to tell you that your husband has died." I sat there dumbly while Morag held my hand. And then, to my astonishment, the younger policeman stepped forward and said, "Have you made any funeral plans?" I was so shocked that I regret to say that I almost shouted at him, "How could I? He's only been gone a few minutes." I sincerely hope that training for delivering that sort of news to the recently bereaved has improved. Morag drove me back to our house, and Ethel handed Alistair back to me. Somebody had rung the Mackay-Jameses and they were on their way. I sat with Alistair in a total haze, hugging him to me while the two women packed a suitcase for him and one for me. Ba and Bob eventually arrived. Ba was distraught and bombarded me with questions which I simply couldn't answer. Questions like, how did he get to this stage? Why didn't you take him to the doctor? Why didn't you tell us? Why was he on that medication? All of which I tried to answer as best I could, avoiding the fact that a lot of the stress, if not all, had been caused by them. And still she went on, "He was fine before he met you, and now look at him. He's dead. Bob has to go and identify the body." At that stage, not a lot had been explained to me about the exact circumstances of Fred's death. The police had told me that there would be a post-mortem held, but in the mental haze I was struggling with, not much sank in. So I had to hear this from his mother. He deliberately walked into a truck, which at the time I believed, as I had no reason not to. Ethel and Morag helped me and Alistair and our luggage into the back of the Mackay-James car, and they drove off on up to Glen Cruton. I didn't turn round and I didn't wave. I just sat slumped in the back seat, cradling my baby. I never saw any of either of those two kind women again, although I did write to them later on to thank them for their help and kindness. We arrived at Glen Cruton and I stumbled up the stairs and then recoiled when I saw our bedroom, the one with the big double bed which Fred and I always shared. "I simply can't do it," I said. "I can't sleep there, when only 2 weeks ago we slept together in that bed." Fortunately, Grandmum, who was Bob's 82-year-old mother, happened to be staying at Glen Cruton at the time, and she, being the sweet, wonderful old lady that she was, offered up her room for me. She also took Alistair into her care, feeding him, changing him, and keeping him amused, while the doctor, who'd been called in from Oban, had a little chat to me and gave me some sleeping pills. Gratefully, I took one as it was mid-afternoon and managed to get some sleep. The only thing was that when I woke up, I realized that it hadn't all been a terrible nightmare, but Fred was already dead, and through such terrible circumstances. Bar came in and told me I'd better get dressed for dinner, as they had invited some people around a few days ago, but didn't want to put them off. They were going to go ahead with this dinner party, notwithstanding the fact that their beloved son and my husband had died that afternoon. I could scarcely believe my ears, but I did as I was told. Grandmum took charge of Alistair again, and I walked down the stairs very slowly, dressed in my long evening tartan kilt, complete with sash and brooch, to appear in the sitting room. There was a very subdued, hushed group of people there. Apparently, they'd all rung up, having heard the bad news, and often offered to postpone the dinner party to some other time. But Bar had insisted they come, saying it'll be good for me and Bob to be surrounded by friends at this sad time. They didn't care what it would be like for me with people I scarcely knew, not knowing what on earth to say to me as a newly bereaved widow. Dinner party went on interminably. The staff were red-eyed and very solemn. The conversation was almost non-existent, except for remarks about the weather. And we had to sit through this charade for several hours while Bar and Bob got blind drunk. If I hadn't been immersed in grief, I would have been embarrassed for them. But as things were, I just wanted to hurry the whole evening through, excuse myself, and go and take a sleeping pill to get me through the night. I knew that Alistair was in good hands and that Grandmum James loved spending time with him. That's it for now, folks. There's more to come. Want to thank you all for listening. And I also want to thank John Moslane for being my sound engineer, or I don't know what else to call him, but he's been a rock of strength throughout making these videos, and also to Sean van Vuren, who always carefully and beautifully puts up these videos to the videos. I want to tell you that I have a website, www.whitezulubook.com, where you can learn a lot more about my life, my family, and see plenty of photographs there. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.